Welcome to Laurier's Teaching Excellence Conversation Series. I'm Mary Wilson, Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning at Wilfrid Laurier University. And today I'm with Michelle Skop from Laurier's Faculty of Social Work, who received the 2022 Innovation in Teaching Award. Michelle has an innovation mindset and approaches all of her teaching and research in ways that challenge and build on broader pedagogical research. Her work on simulation-based learning is a critical contribution to social work education, and her compassionate, creative orientation to her classroom continues to inspire her students and her colleagues. I'm excited to talk to Michelle and learn more about her teaching practice. So, Michelle, simulation-based education is a unique component of professional development within social work, but something that you have done a great deal of research and work into. And you find that it really creates a unique dynamic with your students. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with simulation-based education?
So with simulation-based learning, what we have is we have an actor who's trained to be they're sometimes called standardized persons, standardized clients, standardized patients, but they're actors specifically trained to be in that role. And in social work, we call them service users. And what happens is the student role plays the social work role with the actor. And not every student is in the simulation. And again, you were asking about kind of how we embed it in the program. The way I've piloted simulation is that the students volunteer. So in our two simulations, 3 to 4 students volunteer to be in the role of the social worker. Everybody else observes because there's such value in learning through observation.
Yes.
And in the beginning, students are practicing beginning a first social work interview, for example. And then when they come back for the second simulation, it's the same case scenario, but they're practicing a social work assessment in that time. Now, my vision and my goal for down the road is to hopefully have a collective, a hub where we have a center where we have simulations that can be offered for any instructor that would like to use simulation in their course, not just in social work, but across all the different programs.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'd love to be able to see is that every student in the class will have the opportunity to participate in the simulation. So in our Bachelor of Social Work program, students are in placements in 3rd year and 4th year. And students were saying at that 2nd year, at the earlier stage, they really wanted to know how could we practice our skills, really to build confidence to become placement ready. So I started doing research on simulation, meeting with colleagues who were using simulation at different universities, and really thinking about how could I embed it in the BSW program here at Laurier Brantford.
So the preparation for that within curriculum, so how you situate that within the student's overall experience, what are some of the considerations that you found you need to factor in?
I love creating and building. And whenever I'm doing something new, I always think start off small and evaluate it. And that's where the research comes in as well, in terms of how do we embed scholarship of teaching and learning into the work. So what I did was I created a course on communication and interviewing skills in consultation with colleagues as well as our field department. And we have a lot of placement, so also with feedback from placement agencies on what were some key skills that students could work on, in this course. So the curriculum was really developed collaboratively through consultation. And then what I did was I embedded simulation at 2 time points in the course, in weeks 5 and week 8. And what that does is students then are just not doing like a deep dive into the deep end of a pool, because most of them are saying, what is simulation? They haven't used this pedagogy before.
Yes.
So that provides an opportunity for the first month for students to really be able to practice experiential learning strategies such as role playing and other active learning in the safety of the classroom, and it gives us an opportunity to really build that group dynamic.
So I imagine the construction of the simulation scenario is quite an undertaking. Is it based on branching logic, or is it pretty particular in the outcome, the interaction that you're endeavoring to take the students through, and do they scaffold in complexity?
Great, that's a great question, Mary. I had the privilege of working and learning from Dr. Tula Korgiantakis at University of Toronto. She's a professor in the Faculty of Social Work there. And so she really helped support me in the process of learning about simulation. And she was kind enough to share her case scenarios with me. So what I did was I adapted her scenario and with the reality of COVID, also embedding a COVID theme within it. It's a really long scenario in the sense that it goes through the service user's history, their health history, family history, social history, and only the actor knows the information.
Right.
And we do training, so before the students see the experience unfold, there's a lot of behind the scenes
Preparation of the actor, because there's probably some dimensions of improv associated with the
Exactly. And so really it's meant to mirror that when you're a social worker working in the field, you know, you're connecting and working with people that have these really rich lives and histories, and it's through the questions that we ask that people's experience that you learn about. So it's really about that connection,
right,
that the story unfolds. Now, the actor is prompted to start with a certain sentence, an opening. And also they're given instructions ahead of time that if the student is going in this direction, they
how to
can
redirect.
do this. Or to, you know, it's a beginning simulation.
In a particular way that should elicit another set of questions.
Exactly, and not to be too hard or challenging, especially with an early simulation. But the actor kind of plants little seeds throughout with their history for students to pick up on and ask questions.
So I imagine a lot of the work that you do in the course before the week 5 and week 8 simulations is also around building trust among the student groups, because if they trust each other and trust you and trust the process, they're probably more inclined to think and act deeply. And then also, what do you do to help them with the reflective process that's so critical to all forms of experiential learning, but particularly this?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I trained as a social worker and I worked in mental health and community and hospital settings prior to returning back to school for my PhD. And so for me in practice, it's all about that relationship building. And I really believe strongly it's all through that rapport. And so for me, that's really what I try. I love teaching. Like, it just makes me so happy. And I really love to teach through relationship with students. So what we do is, I think it's really learning through feeling, because students might not remember in 4 years a fact or, specific statistic, but they'll remember how they felt, within a certain situation. And so I really believe in that holistic, embodied learning, and really, really impacted by really thinking about, when we think about decolonizing education, and thinking about how do we learn holistically and through relationship. I'm really influenced by, for example, the work of my colleague, Dr. Kathy Absalon, in the Faculty of Social Work, around learning in a holistic, embodied manner. So I bring music into the classroom, and whether the class is in person or remote, like virtual, using Zoom during the pandemic, starting with a song, starting with some sort of physical activity, get students up out of their chairs and being silly. So I love also learning and engaging and connecting through humor. Like realizing, life is short. We can't take ourselves so seriously. So if we can all laugh, then what we can do is we can say, it's okay. I don't have to be so self-conscious.
Right.
And so I try to embed those so that students are actually learning, but they're having fun at the same time. And they don't realize that they're actually learning because they're learning these really important skills about how to connect, how to build rapport with service users in the future through the rapport that they're building in the classroom.
So those teaching practices that you employ around rapport building, I suspect that's part of what you do to create inclusive environments for learning as well, because our students come from so many prior experiences with such different knowledge base and different orientations to the approach to study in a class like that that's so interactive. So can you talk a little bit about inclusive pedagogy, and then I'd love to know as well a little bit more about the work that you've been doing around critical pedagogy and the connections that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I believe a classroom is a space where I want every student to feel recognized and to feel seen and to feel that their contribution is valued. And I know historically, you know, when we think about the classroom, it is also a microcosm for the wider world.
Yes.
And so we see biases come into the classroom. You know, we can see discrimination coming into the classroom. And so we see all those different forms of discrimination that can occur. And for me, what's really important is to create a space where students have a voice. And so students from communities that have historically been marginalized, that they do not feel silenced in the class is so important to me. Part of that as an instructor is also attending to microaggressions. So if you see a bias enacted, that to stop and really focus on deconstructing and discussing what happened and doing that repair.
So concretely, how do you do that? Because so many of us struggle in those moments in the classroom. You recognize the microaggression, but we don't always have that immediate intervention that's at hand for us as educators that we feel confident will help to turn the tenor of the conversation in the class.
So part of it, and I think again this goes back to, for me as a social work practitioner, the idea of immediacy, to stop, because what's happening in the moment is more important than the content that you had planned to cover. And so just saying, no, like we need to attend to what just happened and have a conversation. And then I feel that it's also follow-up afterwards with students on a one-on-one basis to check in to see how they're doing. I've had also classes where, you know, I said, let's cancel the next class, not the actual class,
substance of it, the intended content.
And we're going to just have a talk. We're going to talk about what happened last week, and we're going to debrief, and we're just going to create a space to converse. Now, what I feel enables this process to happen is in the very first class, I talk to students about what did they want to get out of the class? What did they want to learn? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? So that they're all active players and active learners, as well as what did they want to learn? When I ask them what do they want to learn about, I also want them to have opportunities to add different pieces to the curriculum, that it doesn't have to be fixed. Another part of it for me through that conversation in the beginning is to ask students, what do you need to feel safe in our classroom? Because I guess, you know, one of the debates is, can we truly feel safe? Or is it about creating a safer or a brave, thinking about the work of Arrow and Clemens around creating a brave spaces in the classroom. And so part of that then becomes a co-created guideline that we create. And I tell students, you know, this is emergent, so we'll start the conversation today. You might not know what you need today, but you might in 2 weeks say, you know what, I think I need this. And so it's a living document that on the discussion
share.
On the discussion board, I upload the document in a couple places. Like I'll have it where the syllabus and where the weekly plans are uploaded. But then also in the discussion board, student can add to different ideas. And then so it's always just this living document in this process.
And have you found that you refer back to it, but they do as well, because they feel a sense of ownership over it?
Absolutely. I feel it's also important that when we have a situation where we need to have a discussion, I can refer back to the guidelines to say, hey, we co-constructed these guidelines, and one of the guidelines was that if we feel the need to pause the class and have a discussion, we'll do that. and I will, yeah, and and part of that would also be my role as the facilitator, and the responsibility I will take, but also the responsibility and accountability students will take too. And that was another thing I found after COVID or during COVID. I really changed my teaching to the point where I really tried to embed, even in a syllabus, the values that were informing my teaching. So care, compassion, inclusivity, like going back to your original question, but also relational accountability. And for me, that's about what you can expect from me as the instructor, but also what I expect from you as students, because I think about the work of Nell Noddings around a pedagogy of care.
Yeah.
A pedagogy of care is a two-way street, right? It's reciprocal between, it could be a community, and it's a reciprocal process. And I really try to embed that within every aspect of the curriculum. So again, going back to inclusivity, it's really important for me that I'm teaching students about anti-oppressive practice, talk about decolonizing social work, talking about anti-racist education.
Yes. Yeah.
And part of that is how we enact that in the relationships in the classroom. Part of it for me is also thinking about how do we problematize power dynamics?
Yes.
How do we problematize the power of the professor too?
Yeah.
How do we bring in multiple forms of knowledges into the classroom? And really say, why is it the professor who's creating the knowledge and sharing it? What about students bringing in their knowledges?
Yes.
Community stakeholders. So a few years ago, actually when I began as an assistant professor, I was really influenced by the work of one of my colleagues, Dr. Nancy Freeman, who was bringing, she was teaching a course on child welfare and partnering with the child welfare agency to co-construct the learning. And I took a similar approach when creating a healthcare course, healthcare and social work practice. And for me, it was really this idea that when I worked in the field, I always worked on interdisciplinary teams. It was never just me.
Yeah.
So what I did was I recruited a community advisory board of social workers and other healthcare professionals, like our therapists, nurses, and public health, as a way to build relationships within the Brantford and surrounding community, but also to talk about the value of weaving together different voices.
Preparing students for interprofessional practice and understanding how their professional orientation will dovetail with the other resources in community.
Exactly. And then if we're talking about, thinking critically as well, it became a really rich opportunity to bring in the social determinants of health. So thinking about how race and gender and class, how issues of poverty, how all these different pieces impact health, not just we don't think about health as an individual construct, but as a social, impacted by all these different social inequalities and inequities. So the goal was, through the class, that we would be teaching about what anti-oppressive social work practice is, not just my perspective on it, but social workers working currently in the
practice.
field, bringing in current issues and scenarios.
Yeah, and that resonates differently with our students, right? I was just listening to a speaker recently, Henry Giroux. I'm sure you're probably familiar with him as a critical pedagogy theory as well. He was doing a talk for the Human Restoration Project. And he was talking about how it is necessary for us to prepare our students to question and to talk back, not in disruptive ways that are negative, but really productively challenging ways, so that we can teach them how to see those systemic barriers and those power dynamics and question their purpose and their function in I think really helpful ways for us socially. And it sounds like you're doing that quite purposefully, and some of it is grounded in the work of theorists like Nell Noddings and Paulo Freire and
and Freire has really been the pedagogy of the oppressed was such a foundational text for me. Really thinking about the value and the importance of education being a human right and it being grounded in the community. So really ensuring that we're magnifying and centering community voices within within education. Another piece you had asked about reflexivity.
Yes. Yeah.
In part for me of anti-oppressive practice and critical pedagogy is that critical reflexivity. And what that means is really providing an opportunity for students to think about their positionalities and their social location. So how do all these different aspects of what makes up our identities, in plural, because we have so many different aspects of ourselves.
Yeah.
How are we impacted by, just being in the world, by when we're working with a service user, going back, let's say, to the simulation, what's coming up for us? What are our biases?
What are our assumptions?
What are
right?
our assumptions?
Yes. And where do they come from, and what purpose are they serving? Yeah.
Because in the simulation, students, there's pages of information. Students only have a paragraph. But that paragraph can, is enough information for them to, again, make assumptions. And they've talked about that.
Yes.
Assumptions they've made until more information unfolded through the scenario. So what I like to do is really always ensure debriefing opportunities where we can unpack assumptions, values, beliefs, and also what are you feeling in the moment, right? Because it's through understanding our feelings that can just be so rich in terms of understanding. Our feelings can be almost an entryway to understanding what assumption is coming up in that, what value.
Yes, and I think that the approaches that you're using in your course with your students is very likely to help them make the transition from more instrumentalist, sort of mechanistic, process-driven, to more critical thinking and professional practice, right? That robust, integrative kind of understanding of why those practices in social work have been put forward and what to choose in a moment that will be productive for the client that you're working with.
And they're actually given the opportunity to do it themselves as well at the end of the semester after the 2 simulations. And even after the simulations, they have the opportunity through course assignments, because you had asked about scaffolding. Each simulation is scaffolded, and then the assignments are scaffolded. So it creates this pathway of continuous learning, but also building on the reflexive piece.
Right.
And at the end of the course, they each have an opportunity to partner with a peer in the class and do a video. They can create the scenario, and then they take turns role-playing the social worker and the service user, and it gives them an opportunity to demonstrate and enact some of the skills that they've learned, and really to think about what does socially just practice look like. They then write a reflection paper afterwards to reflect on their learning and their thoughts about their communication skills and where they want to go from here in the future in terms of next steps. But even, going back to the beginning of the course, I asked them to identify a passion project, in the sense, what do they want to learn about and build on throughout the semester, so they're really owning their learning. And then that end part with the case scenario, with their own case scenario that they create, provides an opportunity to really reflect on that journey that they've embarked on over the last 12 weeks.
You talked about the act of creation and the power that brings to students in sort of the depth and consequence of their reflection. It was something that really stood out in your teaching portfolio as well, is the value you place on creative practice and innovation as an educator. So why do you value that so much? What has it meant to you as an educator?
So we were talking before about reflexivity and our values and assumptions. So one of my values has always been creativity and learning through creativity. And part of that is also through my own childhood experience, as my mother's an artist. And so from the time that I was really young, my sister and I were always creating, whether that was sewing dolls or creating just doing like all these really
crafts,
arts and crafts projects, to the point that I didn't want to go to school because it was too much fun doing all the arts and crafts at home. So I started painting as well. And so for me, I love thinking about how can we, I really feel that the world like I tell students about, we can flourish through being open to possibility, and that's really my motto. So I show students a painting that I created at the beginning of the semester with the motto about being open to possibility, saying we can play together. It's not about being perfect. It's about taking risks and like really pulling ourselves outside of our comfort zone, because that's how we grow. So for me, it's the creativity for me is bringing in, I do love bringing in arts-based pedagogy. So I teach a course on creative arts and social work. So, but it's not just teaching about different types of creative arts, but for me, it's really about weaving in creative arts throughout all of my courses as a way to say, let's think about creative thought processes.
Yes.
And really having students build their confidence to say, I can take this risk, I can try this. And if I'm not really good at it, that's okay. But also let's have a chat and let's talk about those narratives that can be really self-defeating as well.
Yes.
So for me, it's really reinforcing that it's about a process. It's not about the outcome. So let's work together and just let's play with ideas.
So your students will undoubtedly hear you talk about the purpose behind your teaching practice, and is the introduction of creative expression in part to help them make strange what seems familiar to them in what they're learning about, so that they can deepen their understanding of it, approach it in a different way.
Yeah, I've always liked doing things in unique ways. And so, yeah, to think about, like when we think about critical thinking and problem solving, oftentimes we really need to kind of explore different ways of thinking about the world. And I find art can really open up. Sometimes when we draw, it helps us also to maybe express a feeling that we had difficulty articulating. So sometimes it helps to connect to different possibilities and different thought processes. So it provides us an opportunity for self-expression. And I always tell students there's always a rationale for why I do what I do, and they've said that back to me. They're like, we know there's a reason behind why we were doing this today. But again, it has to do with that creating that brave space, where creating the opportunities to say, if something's not working, then let's talk about it and we'll change things around. So if you're uncomfortable with a creative component, then like maybe we can think about options for what that looks like. And that also for me goes to universal design for learning, which is really important. Thinking about that there's not one activity or one assignment. Like there are many different outputs that we could make available to students that would demonstrate learning outcomes in a course.
Yes.
So really thinking about like the creativity with that as well, that there's just multiple ways that we can learn together.
Yeah, and those are professional capacities for social workers as well, that awareness of self and understanding your situation and how you're contributing to the interactions. And then also being empathetic and being creative in the framing so that you can bring a client to consideration in a variety of different ways. So it's very overtly a professional competency, right?
And because if you're working with a service user and let's say you're at an impasse, then if we can think creatively, perhaps we pivot and do something a little different. So hopefully they'll be able to come back to that learning to say, why does it have to be this way? There's lots of different approaches that we could take. And at the end of the day, it's not about the approach, it's really about the power of the relationship. So that's what I really strive to teach students, that it's all about it's our relationship with each other, and hoping that they take that into their practice to really think about practicing in a reflexive, socially just manner. And part of that is being able to step back and reflect and say, something doesn't feel right, or this feeling is coming up for me, and really being able to explore that.
So Michelle, you have such a rich framework and toolkit that you draw upon as an educator. I think it might be interesting for others to hear a little bit about what you want most for our students and educators at Laurier in the years ahead. Like, what do you think we should really be focusing on developing for teaching and learning?
That's a big question.
It is a big question. Yes. Yeah.
I feel, again, it's really about, I mean, I think I'm going to sound repetitive, but it's really creating opportunities for critical thinking through the relationship building. When we think about Laurier's strategic plan, I think about connection with the community and thinking about experiential learning opportunities. So really creating those bridges between our university and the communities that we live and work in is so important. So to see more opportunities for, I think, like innovation and what does learning look like? Does it have to happen in a classroom? Could we sit together in a park, or go for a walk together? Like just thinking about the multiplicity of ways that learning can occur. Even though I love critical theory, I also love concrete practice as well. And so really being able to bring the two together through assignments. So really creating really practical assignments where students can see how concepts and theories, what do they look like out in the world? And again, it's creating those connections. My primary appointment is at our Laurier Brantford community, and the lovely thing about that campus is the interdisciplinary nature of it. So I think there's so many opportunities to continue just working together, collaborating with community partners, and creating those like really rich learning opportunities with students.
My thanks to Michelle Skop for joining me today, and I hope that you'll join me for more conversations that celebrate exceptional teaching practices, explore diverse teaching philosophies, and discuss the future of teaching and learning in higher education.